Welcome back to The Walk. I'm excited to be here with Christina. And so Christina is a friend of mine. We go to church together. I actually first really got to know Christina more through CrossFit. We were doing CrossFit, not same time, but at the gym. And so you there's a community there and you get to know that. So Christina, tell me about you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So my name is Christina Caldwell, and I am a mother of 3 children, and all my children are grown, and I'm expecting to be a grandmother in May. So we've got a lot of blessings being poured down on us right now. I'm discovering a new me in this season. I walked through a very painful divorce 17 months ago, and I'm still recovering from that. But God has been good through it.
I break a lot of, I ask inappropriate questions, so I'll ask a question specifically, because age, I know, is not something that people are supposed to be asked for, specifically women. But just because someone out there, maybe kind of, as they're listening, who are talking about. How old are you?
I'm 47. Okay. Oh, gosh. I take that back. I'm 48. I'll be 49 in February.
All right. So. Okay. And then you grew up here in the Northwest?
I kind of grew up a little bit everywhere. My mother is Native Alaskan, so I lived there until I was 9. And then came to Washington and spent about a year here. I went through the foster care system in the state of Washington. And then was very fortunate to have some relatives that I didn't really know, but got to meet in the process of being in foster care, and they became our legal guardians for me and my 2 sisters. So once we became a family with them, they decided to uproot from the Bellingham area, and they took us to Southern California. So I actually feel like I grew up in Southern California. Okay. We lived in a city called Hawthorne. I went to school in the city right next door in Lawndale, and that's kind of where I planted my roots and kind of grew up there. And I left the South Bay area in 2002. So I had my first 2 children in the LA area and had a career and everything there. And then I picked up and I came back to the Northwest, back to family in Bellingham. And then I made my way into Walla Walla. I've been in Walla Walla 15 years now. This year will mark 16 years that I've been in Walla Walla. So.
And why Walla Walla?
My ex-husband is born and raised here in Walla Walla, right. So we moved to be home for him. Okay, all right.
So you got married in the South Bay area?
I met my husband in...
You said the South Bay or whatever. I don't know. I'm not from there, so I have no idea.
No. I have a very, very... my story is not simple. Yeah. There's a lot to it, and so no. My ex-husband who brought me to Walla Walla, I met him when I had moved from California to Bellingham. I was actually fleeing domestic violence, and I didn't meet him right away, but in the course of everything I was walking through, I ended up meeting him. And just felt a heart connection to him instantly. And so we were married in 2007. And then we moved over to Walla. We actually came to Walla Walla, got married here. And he was already moved over here. And we were just waiting for my 2 oldest children to finish up the school year. And then we followed shortly after that. So that's what brought me to Walla Walla.
Wow.
So.
Okay. So one of the first things I want to talk about is why you're sitting here in front of me. Just because I find it interesting how God works in different ways, and so I'll tell you that part of doing this podcast, I've been praying for God to help me think of different people who I think would have great stories to share, and I had a list, and you were not on that list, and then I was doing security months back. And I saw you, and I genuinely felt God saying, putting you on my mind that you should be on that list. I didn't say anything about it. Then several weeks later, I talked to Kara about ideas and wanting to have a diverse demographic of people that I'm interviewing, having conversations with. So it's not just all men, and then also different ages and so forth. And so Kara, the first name that she came to Kara's mind was yours. And I said, that's very interesting, because here's what I felt. And so that happened. And then the following weekend, I'm serving security at church. And then I get put right at the drum side. And who is the first chair right there, the closest one? And it's you. And it just felt to me, and if you're not of faith, I think you'll say it's coincidences. I don't think it's coincidence. But if you have faith, I felt that I felt God put you in front of me because he wanted me to talk to you. And I felt that he's done that before with other people. So then the next personal hurdle kind of was like, okay, well, you know Christina, you're not like very close with Christina, and you're going to go in and say, hey, I'm doing this podcast, and will she even be interested in talking about it, right? And so then when I asked you and you responded, your response, I thought, was to me kind of really more confirmation that I felt like this is something that God wanted to happen. Mm-hmm. And your willingness in saying, I feel like you asking me is like God wanted me to tell my story. And to me, again, that just reinforces me, helps me feel more comfortable. I'm not a public speaking person. And so when I do this, is very much out of my comfort zone. I feel comfortable talking to people. That's not a problem. That's what I do for a living. But when I feel that, and that in multiple ways, it's like God's interacting and God's maneuvering the situation, and this is what he wants, then it takes the pressure off me, because I'm like, all right, God, you show up, you lead whatever conversation, wherever we're going in, because it's about you and what you're doing, and not about Josh and his interviewing skills. Because if we're counting on that, we're going to fail. I can guarantee you that's going to fly. So you want to share about that at all? Your from your experience about getting a text from me randomly saying, hey, let's have a conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So coming into the new year, I was really battling with a lot of things. But I think in the going back, like in this process of the past 17 months, I've faced a lot of hard things in my life, and by the power of God, I've overcome them even before I knew who the Lord was. Where I stand today, I understand looking back that God's hand has always been in my life. Wow. I just hadn't recognized it. Sure. But this past 17 months has felt like the hardest thing I've ever gone through. And so there's a lot of tearing down of beliefs and things like that. But in the midst of it all, I felt so alone and so lost. You know, I have my relationship with the Lord, which I'm thankful for. And I clung to that, you know, and I still do to this moment and to this day, and I will as I walk out the rest of my life. But I think inside of us, we're designed to be in community. We're designed to not walk life alone. Right. And so, you know, to have my person stripped away from me and not have anybody to take that to. Right. And it's like I have to relearn everything that I've had over the last 15 years because actually it was 17 years that I was with my husband. And so I just felt in this place of aloneness. And in these 17 months of just trying to figure out, what do I do? Why do I feel this way? How do I get out of this? I didn't have anybody that had walked it before to like be beside me, to pick up the phone and call. Lots of great friends who will pray for me, and I'm so thankful for that. But when it comes down to like the meat and bones of it, like it's an uncomfortable subject. It's uncomfortable to sit in front of somebody who is like crying all the time or just, you know, asking the hard questions that you don't have answers for. And I don't expect anybody to have those answers, but it's just been all of that to say it's a lonely place to be. Right. And I keep saying to myself, if only I had somebody who understood these things. And I always ended up finding my answers. The Lord gave them to me. And you know, and that maybe that is my portion, is like that's what's strengthening and building me, right? Because God doesn't take anything and he takes the ugliest, he takes the ashes and he turns them to beauty and all of those things. So he's growing something in me. And in this season, I like to say that if it doesn't define me it will refine me.
Wow,
right.
that's good. I
So
like
those
that.
were choices
Right.
I've had to make over these last. It's like, am I going to allow this to define me and leave me stuck in the place that I feel like I'm stuck in right now? Or am I going to allow God to refine me and make this into something more than I could ever imagine? To get back to your question, is, so when you asked me that, I have been struggling with that in the new year of like, I don't know, do I matter? Does what I walk through, is this pain for nothing? You know, and I, of course, the answer is like, no, it's not, because look at where you are today. You know, I can honestly say today, in the midst of all of that pain that I've experienced, and I still experience on a daily basis, is that I wouldn't trade it for what God has given me. You know, would I want my marriage back? Yes, I wouldn't want it back the same way it was. But I wouldn't trade losing it for what God has given me and the relationship that I've learned to cultivate for Him. So when you asked me to do this, it felt a little like, oh gosh, you know, in that thought process, yes, I didn't take long to respond, because, you know, in our journey, you know, that when we learn to speak with the Lord, it doesn't have to take a long time to get an answer, right? God can instantly drop it into you. And so the only doubts I were having were my man-made doubts, the fears that I allow to control me. But in my heart, God was just like, you know, this is a way to be there for somebody else. Right. You know, you don't know who's who's on the other side of your story waiting to find. Right. You know. So.
Wow. You said so many good things there. And I'm not trying to, I hope that's not offensive. I don't mean it like, this is your life, this is real experiences. But I really find, I don't know how to say, but I just love your passion in different ways than things that I've encountered. But being in a situation where you say, you know, it's sink or swim. You talk about this define versus refine. And that choice, as hard as it is a very extremely difficult choice, but that choice, that we do get to make that choice and which way I want to go. And again, I'm not minimizing the pain and the process and how wearing that is and exhausting. But that to be in that place with God where you feel like you're going to take these ashes and turn them into gardens. That's like real faith. That's when people say goals or whatever. That's real, because it's easy to praise. It's easy to worship when things are good. When things are not, well, when things are challenging, when maybe even things that we felt like God had given us get taken from us. Right. That's quite a challenge, an experience to be able to go through, and then adding to that, then feeling alone. Do you want to talk more about that? What do you feel comfortable talking about?
Oh, I'm an open book. I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, yeah, the loneliness, the rebuilding of a life that, you know, I came to Walla Walla on the complete faith of, yes, I had my children and I had my new husband, but I left my family, you know, my parents, everything behind, and as it should be, right? You know, when we enter into marriage, it's covenant and all those things. Right. And it wasn't easy at first, and there was a lot of things that I did poorly, and but you know, it's to. I think in the sense of it, I have to be honest and say that in the breaking of my marriage, it felt like an utter betrayal to me, you know. And that's kind of where the story starts to weave itself. It's like, you know, I want to take it, if you don't mind, I want to take it back to like, I met the Lord by being in Walla Walla. I had a radical encounter with the Holy Spirit by stepping foot into Life Church. And I was invited by a friend that I met through the work that my husband did and things like that. They became a neighbor. And in my hardest moment where I had walked through something very hard, you know, 11 years ago, or I think this year will be 12 years that I gave my heart to the Lord. I walked through something that I wanted death. I didn't want to live anymore.
Right.
And in that moment where I was alone in my home, and I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. This friend came to mind as I had locked myself in my bathroom. And kind of like a little backstory, this friend had been talking to me about who Jesus was to them, and not in a preachy way or anything like that, but in such a beautiful way. I didn't believe in the Lord because I thought, all the bad things, how can there be a God who loves me, right? All of these bad things that had happened since I was a small child. And so I had discounted the Lord. But this friend had always started would talk about things and just randomly like praise the Lord in something they were doing, or like all of a sudden I felt like something inside of me like sit up every time she would say something about it. And then so I found myself hungering to be around her, and be around her where we could just be talking by ourselves, so I could ask her. I could ask her questions about who this God was, and she was never shy. And so in that moment, when I was wanting to end my life in my bathroom, she came to my mind. And so I unlocked the bathroom door and I walked out of my home in this complete state of, I'm sure I looked crazy. And I walked down the block and I knocked on her front door, and she was home. And she brought me through her home and into the backyard. And we sat in the backyard, and she just heard my heart and heard everything that I had to say. And then she asked to pray for me. And I said, yes, I'll take anything. And in that moment, I was probably the first time that I can identify that I felt what I know as now the Holy Spirit come over us. Like everything went quiet, and it was just this beautiful experience where I knew that when I left her house, I still had to face the hard thing. The hard thing was still going to be waiting at home for me when I left her house. The difference is now I felt like I could get through it. Like I was not alone, and that there was hope put inside of me. And before I even left her house that day too, she had invited me to church that Sunday. And so she attended
the first time that you went?
The first time I went to church, yeah. So she had invited me to Life Church, and that was when it was at 4th and Alder in the old cinematic building.
Right.
And so I remember I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go. And that in itself is an incredible story. If you've never been to Life Church, or if you have been to Life Church, if you're not familiar with the culture of how they honor and they worship the Lord, it feels like, whoa, what am I doing here? Right. And I can remember people during worship raising their hands and like just being very passionate about their worship. And I was just like, where am I and what is happening? But at the same time, I was like in tears, like not knowing what to do. Right. And my tears weren't a result of like the hard thing I was going through. My tears were a result of whatever was in that atmosphere. Right. And, for me, now I know that that was the Holy Spirit was in that place. And, so at that time, as they were closing out worship, Pastor Bob got up and started into prayer. And as he started to like do his opening or prayer or whatever, he all of a sudden he stops and he's like, but I have a word for somebody. And I think we were like in the second row or the third row, and he looks and he catches my eye, and he's like, and he comes straight over to me, and I'm like freaking out. My heart right now is about to come out of my chest. And Pastor Bob speaks something to me that there's no way on earth this complete stranger who we just laid eyes on each other could have known in his human self. And so the Lord had put something on his heart, and everything he said to me, I felt like he had been next to me experiencing what I had just walked through, that had brought me to the Lord on that day. And so then he had people lay hands on me, and they prayed over me. And it was like the most radical thing I'd ever experienced. And so by the end of service, when they did altar call, my hand was up. I was all in for the Lord at that moment. And so that kind of thus began my journey to knowing who the Lord is. And So circling back to how that's intertwined with what's gone on within the last year, that foundation was started. But even though I had this relationship with the Lord, we're talking almost 11 years in, I'm faced with another extreme hard thing. It felt, and this one is harder than the last one, because it's the breaking of everything I held near and dear to my heart, everything I coveted. And that's where I've discovered, like, I got myself into trouble. So here I love the Lord with all my heart, right? But did I really love him with all my heart? Because I reserved a part of that heart for my spouse, and I didn't give that up to the Lord. So in this journey of the last 17 months, I discovered in all my conversations with the Lord, how I never put him first. I didn't put him first in my marriage. I compromised there just because it was a point of contention sometimes. My husband didn't come to church with me. He tried to in the beginning, and he wasn't comfortable. He always said, that's not for me. I can be with the Lord in other ways. Right. And so I honored that because I didn't want to rock the boat. Right. And so in this process of feeling betrayed and mad and angry and all of the things that I felt when my marriage blew up, I remember being really mad about something because in the process of going through divorce, I discovered another betrayal, and it floored me. And so I remember, and I was in my counseling session with my counselor, and I said, because I had just found out the day before my counseling session, and I remember in the room being so mad and saying, this is why I don't trust anybody. This is why I should have never relied on him. I should have never given him everything of me, because look at where it's gotten me. I'm back to nothing. And in that moment, instantly I heard God say, but you haven't given it to me. Right. And that broke me. And I was just that opened up. And it's true. I never trusted the Lord the way that I trusted my husband. Right. I didn't trust him with anything, only the good things. And so that began a journey of just complete and utter surrender to the Lord.
Which I'm going to kind of interrupt, because I think you mentioned something that I think then goes back to even earlier. You said it brings him back to nothing. Which you've alluded to is something that for a lot of your life, you've been fighting different things. You talked about domestic violence in California. And so, yeah, it seems like once again, almost like is being hit in that same spot where the thing that you're avoiding the most, right, is being forced to be put back in that situation.
Right.
Would you mind sharing a little bit of starting out earlier?
Sure. So at a very young age, my earliest memories are of my mom being single, and then a man coming into her life, and she would get dressed up all the time, and she'd look so beautiful, and they would go out, and my sisters and I would have usually be with our cousins, because my mom, we lived in Alaska, and so all her siblings were there, so they all went out together and things. So older cousins, we'd all kind of just be lumped together, and so there was this this very brief moment of, I just remember this happiness of my mom, always getting ready to go out and stuff. And then all of a sudden, I can remember the announcement that she married this man. And we weren't a part of that, but any of those things. And then that's kind of where it kind of just took off into darkness, because there were drinking problems for the two of them. So every weekend they would go out and they would drink very heavily. They weren't social drinkers; they were partiers, right. And then they would come home, and it would either lead to two different things. It would either lead to my mom passing out, and then that would enable my stepdad to come into my room or my sister's rooms, because there were three of us girls. And so that was the life that we learned. And then if it wasn't that happening and my mom didn't pass out when they came home on the weekends, it would be them coming home and angry about something they got in a fight about while they were out. And those fights led into blown out fists. My mother was beaten quite severely, and every weekend the police would be called, and they would show up to the house. And so this was just a cycle that went on, probably from kindergarten to third grade. And so it's a lot to deal with. So at a very young age I was taught that to be ashamed of my body because the attention it brought and the attention it got, and then also to be fearful of just fearful. I didn't know what to expect.
Right.
And alcoholism is a huge it destroys, and so things like that. So that was kind of like what I knew. And in those early days, my mom did take us to church, and I can remember like little sitting in Sunday school, and like I can remember taking like a bunch of pennies to put in the offering jar. Those are like little memories I have. But because of the choices she made,
right.
church stopped. And then as a child, when you only hear certain things, you cling to these things and you make them your reality. So I heard that like you could pray and the Lord would take things away, right? And so that's all is like I'm gonna pray this and it's gonna go away. And when that doesn't happen, because my young mind doesn't truly know, then I became resentful and then bitter and angry, and then all the emotions just kind of lead to like, well, you don't care about me, I don't care about you. And so I turned my back on the Lord and I didn't search him out. And then, so that led to a life of, I did say that, I was put into foster care, and then we were very blessed to have an aunt and uncle that were distant that we didn't know come in and decide to take me and my sisters out. They were very young. They had a small child of their own at the time. And their hearts are so huge and big, but they were so busy working and trying to just make sure that everything was taken care of. And we came to them at such I was 10, my other sister was 12, and my other sister was 14. We came to them at these ages where we kind of felt, I'm sure it felt to them that we knew how to care for ourselves and do all these things. But what wasn't recognized was that we needed a loving father figure. And my uncle, who I now call my dad, is an amazing man. And I don't want there to be any thought that he was not loving. He was, but in his in his own way. And as an adult, I've just recently learned in the last year through a conversation with one of my sisters, is that he admitted to her at one point that he wished he had done better by us. And it was this beautiful conversation that she shared with me about how he said, but because he knew of the trauma we endured at the hands of our stepdad, and he was afraid, to hug us. And so he was doing what he thought was right, which I totally it broke my heart when I heard that. And it made me just have compassion and be like, to know that he loved us that much, that he would, think that was something to help us. And so, but that led to me so having this negative body image, having this corrupt idea of what love was, I started into puberty. And as I got old enough and started to become a young woman and boys started to pay attention to me, I gravitated to that in an unhealthy way. And so I became promiscuous at a very young age. I started drinking at a very young age, and just doing things that filled me in the moment, but always left me feeling even worse on the inside. And so I had this I have this lifetime of just feeding myself death, I'm slowly eating poison.
Trying to fill a void. Yeah,
filling a void that's never going to be filled. So that kind of takes you back to, making poor choices in my just in a desperate attempt to have something more. And, you know, it's an exhausting life.
I bet.
So,
especially when you feel like you take so many steps forward, you put so much progress, and then you feel that, again, the carpet gets pulled from under your feet and your back. You used, I don't think zero, but you used the word, I think you said zero.
yeah. Yeah, so when this was my second marriage, but my third relationship. And so when I met my husband, I had this hope. I was like, I had a better understanding of how I wanted to do life and how I didn't want to go back and make the same mistakes I've made in the past. So I tried to correct things in my will, right? In my own power. And so if I do this, this, and this, but I came into a relationship where I didn't realize I also had a drinking problem. And it never really surfaced until this marriage because, and when I look back at it, it's because I was comfortable, I was safe, and I felt loved. And so, and I was supported, right? I had a partner that I felt was equal to me, that, you know, wanted to be there for the kids, was there for me, and was very loving. And so, but also enjoys having a good time, loves being social, is social by nature. I am not. I have a lot of anxiety over being social and talking to people. I prefer, you know, one-on-ones, no more than a handful of people unless I know you very well. And so, you know, you try to bring those two worlds together without really having a conversation about recognizing that you're two different people, right? You just kind of like blending it together. And so that fueled the alcohol for me. And so it just became like our thing where it was like easier to hand me a drink as we're getting ready to go out and do something social because my anxiety would be so high. Right. And it would bring me back to level.
Yeah, medicated.
Yeah, it medicated me. And it just made me fun Christina. You know, people who knew me when I was a drinker and know me now, they always used to be like, where's fun Christina? You know?
Now we have boring Christina?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
This is the boring. Nobody wants to invite her anywhere.
I doubt it.
So, you know, there's this conflict, and then the alcohol became a vice for me, and it became a stronghold in my life. And although it was never an issue for my husband, it was an issue for me where all of a sudden I was like blacking out. And I would not remember what I was doing the day before. I would feel shame. I mean, even to this day, sometimes I'm like, when I see somebody and I'm like, they seem familiar, I'm like, oh gosh, did I meet them when I was like blackout drunk? And like, I was like so loving and caring of them, and now I completely ignore them. Like, I walk around with that sometimes still. And then I just got to this place, and I had known the Lord, and I still kept drinking, like when I radically encountered the Lord. But it wasn't until this year will be 8 years. So April 29th of this year, I will be 8 years clean and sober.
Praise God.
And it's not by my will.
Right.
It's totally the Lord. Because I always have people say to me, well, do you go to AA? You know, because of like how the severity of my, like I would have to drink to clean my home. And it wasn't like excessive, but I'd have to have a beer, and like I'd be the world's best house cleaner. And things like that. But I had stopped drinking, trying to do it on my own will, gave up hard alcohol because that's what caused the blackouts. So then I just went to beer, and then I like gave up beer for like all alcohol, like fasting it 4 times. But then I'd always find myself back to it. But I was doing so good, and so proud of myself, right? Here I am doing all this hard thing, and I'm breaking this. And we were celebrating my oldest daughter's 21st birthday. We threw this huge party for her, and we brought her dad and her bonus mom to surprise her at this party. And so it was just going to be this great celebration of all of us together. And so, of course, what's going to happen to me? I'm like having all this anxiety. My ex-husband, who's a wonderful man, and I love his wife. We do things as a family together. We co-parent really well together, are coming into town. And I'm like anxious over that. I'm anxious over like trying to keep this a secret. I'm anxious over, and so at the party, I started picking up the hard alcohol, and then it wasn't a late party, and then, but having a good time, taking photos, mingling with everybody, and the next memory I have is waking up in my bed and not knowing how I got there, and I'm all alone in the room, and so there are all these things that immediately. Who did I embarrass? Did I get in a fight with my husband because of unhealed wounds that we've never addressed that would always surface when I drank? And how did I allow myself to get here again? I was doing so well. And the first thing I did is, like, after those thoughts processed, I got out of my bed and I fell to my knees and I was just bawling. And I was just like, I cannot do this on my own anymore, God. I need you. Please take this from me. And so he took it. I always say I'm a walking miracle because I've never craved having a drink again. We know we live in wine country, right? We have a lot of friends that are winemakers, and I can remember testing it because we went to somebody's house and they were pouring us new samples of what they were releasing. And so I wanted to be polite, right? I wanted to fit in. And so I was like, I can just put it in my mouth and then spit it out. That's not rude because people do that all the time. Just to taste it and appreciate and be a part of the crowd. At this beautiful dinner we were at. And I put the wine in my mouth. And this is a phenomenal winemaker. I loved all of their wine, before I asked God to take alcohol away from me. And I remember putting the wine in my mouth, and instantly I felt like I put a cup of soap in my mouth. And so I politely spit it out. I didn't make a big deal about it. And then I just sat there and I was like, you're right, God. I asked you to take this from me. Thank you from taking this from me. And in that time I realized it was probably because I wasn't strong enough yet to still be able to say no on my own. So he removed every barrier for me. And so...
I like that concept because the devil uses shame in all our lives in so many different ways. But here you wake up, you're disappointed in yourself because you had a great plan going, you had everything going on. And what you did was you fell to your knees and you prayed. And that's beautiful. Just that sincere prayer, and we're asking God to intervene. To me, it's just that I can almost visualize when people are talking and telling me stories. Like I see that, and just the power in that. When we're broken, who do we turn to? And when we're overwhelmed and we know this is too big for us, who do we turn to? And then I think back of you talking about the little girl who prayed for God to take it away. And that prayer didn't change. That prayer remained.
Right.
And you look where we are now, and you talk about saying, I recognize that God has had a purpose for me this whole time. He's protected me. Obviously, you it's not without scars. You've gone through a lot.
Right.
But just that still turning to God, and when we're down. I have a friend who's currently dealing with alcohol addiction. And one of the things that I say is, I don't care if you show up to because we have a men's group that meets in the mornings. I don't care if you show up drunk, just show up.
Yeah.
In the midst of it, just show up. Yeah. Seek Him. Don't clean yourself up before coming to God. And so often, I think we feel like I got to dust myself off. I got to polish myself up, and then I can go to God. But the power of saying, no, I can't do this, and I'm going to show up, even hungover or drunk. But I'm here, and I'm seeking God.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things when we talk about Life Church, that we get to go to church together. Doing security, I've enjoyed being able to see individuals that come in who are under influence of different substances. And it's always a thin issue because you want to make sure they're not disruptive to anyone else. But on the other hand, isn't that where they should be? Like that community, that the ability, that Christ, that love, that Jesus, that's where they should be.
Absolutely.
Something brought that individual in, and not something. The Holy Spirit brought that individual in. And it's a thin line, right? Because you want to make sure that nothing is disruptive, and that people can still worship and be able to have that experience. But the power that this individual, in the midst of their storm of whatever's going on, that they're reaching out to God. I love that. To me, that's powerful.
Yes.
So you're talking about the last 17 months, and being alone and loneliness being a big issue, and friends. You talk about friends and friends wanting to help, but not necessarily knowing what to do, what to say.
Mm-hmm.
I just got done. I'm Psalms currently. I just got done reading Job. But Job's friends. A very good example of
right.
Sometimes think, wow, okay, because even God admonishes at the end. He admonishes the friends.
Yeah.
And Job kind of has to stand for them up a little bit. Like, okay, because God's not happy about what his friends were telling him.
Right.
When he was down and felt alone.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that loneliness?
Yeah, I think it's powerful. Loneliness is extremely powerful. It gives me a new appreciation for people who battle with depression.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke about, like, when I came to the Lord, that suicide was very strong in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never felt it that strong until this last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been attacked with it.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Of, like, wouldn't it be easier just to give up?
Right.
And it would, right? In the moment, it would be
Mm-hmm.
so easy, but the aftermath is always what I think of.
Right.
But how many times? So, loneliness is powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, we hear about it all the time. Like, when you travel, like when the Israelites were traveling through the desert, they never allowed anybody to stray behind, because then, they would die,
Mm-hmm.
whether at the hands of the elements or at the hands of an enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to be in relationship, but it's also important. So in those darkest moments, when I felt like, why isn't anybody here for me?
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn to hear God say, there are people there for you, but how do they know if you don't tell them you need them? And so God did a work in me to break down that, because I think that's a clever tactic of the enemy,
Mm-hmm.
to be like, well, if my friends knew me, if your friends really knew you, why wouldn't they be checking on you? Mm-hmm. Your friends know that you're walking through this. Mm-hmm. Why don't they check in on you more frequently? Mm-hmm. Right? And, man, I've repented for that thought so many times, just because of how it causes me to sin against my friends, against the people I claim to love, because I don't know what they're walking through, right? I'm in this aloneness, but they're still living life. Life is happening to them. And so who am I to assume that they know to drop everything and come to my rescue, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not their job.
Right.
It's, and so it really taught me to recognize the feeling, speak against what it was trying to say to me, and be like, I have power in this situation, and I won't listen to what you're trying to tell me to do. And pick up my phone and text a friend. And it's as simple as saying, I really need prayer. Mm-hmm. I feel this way. Or you don't even have to say that to friends. Sometimes you can just be like, I really need you to cover me in prayer. Right. And the minute that I would be obedient to that, mm-hmm. like, it would just like dissipate. The way I would feel would dissipate. Like the overwhelming sense to want to die. And not always. Like sometimes it would linger. It would have this trail. But then I would have to like dig in deeper. Like get in the car and go put on worship music and drive around. Mm-hmm. Or just get in the Word. All the things that, we always say, oh, I'll do that at the end of my day. Or, oh, I'm too busy to do that. But it's as simple as picking up our phone these days. And so I've really learned to lean in on that. And recognize loneliness as just a tactic of the enemy. It's a true feeling. Mm-hmm. And everything that's happening in that time of loneliness is real. Mm-hmm. I didn't envision it. Right. It's there. It's all the things I'm thinking about are things that have happened to me, are things that could happen, right? But we're not supposed to worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will take care of itself. So God's really like...
That's the concept.
Yeah, that is. But God's
I'm poor at executing that all the time.
Good.
But I pray that God works on me with that.
Good company here. So God's taught me a lot about loneliness and the beauty of being a better friend and being the friend that I want people to be to me. And just understanding that, we're all walking through something, and whatever it is, it's important to that person at that time.
Right.
It doesn't have to look like what I'm walking through because it's encompassing everything that they are. And so it's like, so I really love, like in my loneliness, God has taught me to look outside of myself, still care for the things I need to, like pray for things that I need, right? To go boldly to him and say, I can't do this. Please take this away from me. But to also be in that moment, well, who do you want to put on my heart right now, Lord, that is maybe struggling and isn't where I am right now, and that I could be praying power into their walk with you. And so that's really like, I weep greatly for when I bring up how lonely I felt, because it's, like I said, it's real. It rests inside of me still, and it may always be there, but it's no longer a weight that weights me down. Right. It's more of this, I don't know. It's a buoy that kind of keeps me afloat and makes me realize, like, what is out there. We're all in this big vast sea trying to not drown, looking for our lighthouses. And so these lessons that I'm learning to look at them like a buoy, like, okay, they help keep things afloat. So
it's exhausting. It's wearing, though.
It is.
Because it's not a sprint. It's more of a marathon.
Yeah.
It's a long haul.
Yeah. But all made bearable, and that's the biggest thing I've learned in these 17 months. It's bearable through the Lord, but we have to do the work. I can't just pray a prayer and then wait for it to come to me. Right. I have to do the work. I have to listen. I have to be attentive to all of the things. I stepped away from church in the beginning because there was this great shame. Right. I've led life groups where I've asked the women to pray for my marriage, to pray for my husband's salvation, to pray for my children. And so when you don't see those things come to fruition, right, and it ends in divorce, it felt like, oh gosh, I'm like walking around with this plague, Here I claim to love the Lord so much, but look at what's happening in my life, So then you start to think, well, what do people think of me? Are they passing judgment that maybe I'm not as faithful? Maybe I don't really love the Lord. What am I doing in private that is causing all these things to happen in my life? And so taking on that burden of guilt, right, and assuming that everybody's thinking of me that way, again, is a tactic of the enemy. Right. And so I stepped away from church. I completely isolated, which sometimes I think there's health in that, but it can become unhealthy. Right. And so I recognized it as becoming unhealthy because of how deep and dark my thoughts were going when I would entertain death. And so I had to get back into church, and I had to slowly, open up. And so that's just a process. So when I say we have to do the work, we have to do the work.
You have to, right.
Because I had a choice, like I said earlier, I had a choice to allow my divorce to define me as unlovable, as undesirable, right, as a failure, that I would always be alone, that even if people saw something in me, they would always abandon me, because that's a hurt I carry from my childhood, right? My mother abandoned me. My stepdad was never a stepdad to me. All of these things. But so I can allow that to define me, or I can take all of those things and allow it to refine me. But I can't do any refining on my own. I have to eventually have community. I have to be listening to the Word. I have to be soaking that in. I have to be reading my Bible. So,
having gone most recently in a season where I feel like I've experienced some of the hardest challenges in my life. And nothing compared to what you're having. And although I shouldn't use that term because everyone's challenge is different.
Right.
And not just for anyone who's listening, we all have different challenges. We can't grade them. But knowing what it's like to slide into a pit of depression, and I'm talking about dark, death, dark. You just want it to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling like you have to claw yourself out.
Yeah.
That God's there with you, but he's going to ask you to do a little bit of the work. Right? And one of the things, when you're talking about community, I'm thinking about my personal life experiences also. And I started meeting with guys in the morning for coffee. I'm like, I'm going to build my own therapy. I'm going to build my own community.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I found was when I stepped outside of myself, it was helpful. So there is a benefit in isolation, but on the other hand, the devil's really good, right? So he takes everything that we're afraid about, everything that we've been told, and everything that we've believed about ourselves, and we tell ourselves, and to say, see, you're no different.
Right.
You're still this, or even if you are different, but they still think you're the same person.
Right.
Right. And then doing that and being, and it does take being proactive, saying, I'm gonna reach out to someone, right? It's not fair for me to blame the
mm-hmm.
friends who don't know,
right?
Who their life carries on, so out of sight, out of mind, and they feel things are, so you're doing better now, and you're like, no, I'm not better. I'm like,
right?
You're still suffering,
right?
I asked about a verse,
mm-hmm.
maybe that you felt that kind of speaks to you or that has been helpful for you. You want to share about that?
I would love to. Thank you. I actually am excited. I'm actually. The sweatshirt I'm wearing has the verse that I was given, okay. And I could talk to you all day and run you out of tape here about the things that God is doing. And
I'm not cutting you out by any means.
No, I'm just making fun of myself right now.
Oh, no. I know.
I'm a talker, and people don't. I say I'm an introvert, but I will talk your ear off.
That's a good thing.
The verse that was given to me was actually given to me right after the New Year. I talked about being in this really low place because I was taking inventory of my life and mm-hmm. also, cleaning out the things that still linger in the home that we shared that mm-hmm. needed to go mm-hmm. because they just weren't taken at the haste of it all. And so I was like, okay, this is a new year. I need to make progress. Mm-hmm. And that day, as I was doing that, I was also homesick, and so I had all this time to think and do all these things. Just having a really hard time. And a good friend, a very covenant friend, and I talk about feeling alone, but I shouldn't discredit those that stood and who always sent texts. Right. And they always sent them right when I needed them. And so she is one of those mm-hmm. friends. And she sent me, she had asked me, how was I doing? And so I had told her that I was ill, but then I also dived in because I had just been sitting like for the past 30 minutes, starting to feel bad, starting to feel sorry for myself, starting to feel like I would always be in this place. And then I was battling that with like, okay, God, this isn't how you want me to be. What do I need to do? And so I admitted all those things to her because I could. And then she's like, I really want to talk to you. We had met just before Christmas for coffee. And she's like, and while we were sitting in the coffee shop, she said, this verse came to me. And she's like, and I didn't share it with you. Mm-hmm. And she's like, and now right now reading your text, she's like, the verse was brought to my mind again. Yes. So she sent it to me. And it's Song of Solomon 2:10-13. Mm-hmm. And it says, my beloved spoke and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth, the season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit, the blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. And as soon as I read that, I was just like, a baby, mm-hmm. crying like, Lord, you are so good. Everything that is spoken in that verse just gave me hope to know like I am on the right path. Yes, mm-hmm. I have been in a dark place and I have been in hiding, and the Lord has been pruning things out of my life in these 17 months that I didn't realize were strongholds in my life. They seem so innocent and little, but they actually have a deep root. So, God has been unearthing these things, pulling them out, tearing things down. And so I just felt really, really strongly about that. And then it was confirmed again later that night via social media, of all things. My friend who brought me to the Lord moved away. She hasn't been in Walla Walla for quite some time. But
your neighbor. This is a neighbor that you went to.
Yes, this is the neighbor.
Okay. All right, okay.
So we're circling back. Her name is Michelle. And her mother-in-law has been doing these Tuesday night podcasts or like Instagram lives. And this woman is on fire for the Lord. Anyways, I went to close out all my apps at bedtime, going to bed early. I'm like, I've had a long day. I want to go to sleep. Well, I see as I'm going to close out Instagram that Debbie and Michelle are on the screen together. I'm like, what's Michelle doing on there? And so I open up the previous live stream, and I started listening to it. Within the first few minutes, Debbie brings this verse up. And then she starts talking about it, and it was like it resonated with how I felt, what I heard from it. And then they go on and talk, and as I'm talking, I'm convicted again. So we talk about like feeling lonely and like friends weren't there for me. Well, Michelle was one of those friends that I felt wasn't there for me, even though she's 1,500 miles away, raising small children, being a wife, running a new business, and all these things. But I still had this, right? The enemy is good. And as soon as I heard them talking, and they talked about like how certain things could, plant things in us that we were never meant to carry, right? Like bitterness. And as soon as they said bitterness, the Lord highlighted that to me. He's like, you're holding bitterness against Michelle. And I just was like, felt so convicted, all these things. And then I just was like, I miss my friend. So after I listened to the whole thing, I was going to write her a long text. And then I was like, nope, I'm just going to call her. So I called her. She picked up the phone. Anyways, I got to repent for the things I put on her that she didn't deserve to ever have put on her, and share my heart with her about why I felt that way because of and then she got to confirm to me, which I wasn't asking for, but because she's such a beautiful, gracious person, she confirmed to me that she was never party in that a chance meeting that caused my bitterness. And but we had this wonderful thing. And so she was telling me about how she had just started this clothing company with her good friend, and this verse, Song of Solomon, was what they decided to put on the sweatshirts for the women's conference they were making it for. So it says, awaken, your season is here. And then it has Song of Solomon on one of the leaves. And she's like, Christina. And so a week later, so this was last week, it was last Saturday, I was having a really bad day. Had, living in a small town with an ex who's dating is hard. Is so hard, especially when your heart is still tied to them. I feel like my heart is still tied to them. So was downtown, didn't physically see them because they came into an establishment that I was getting ready to exit, and I was sitting down. And so I was alerted to the fact that they were there. So I was able to stand up and walk out the front door, which brings me to my second verse, because the Lord has given me two verses in this season, and it's out of Genesis 19. So, when Lot was allowed to flee Sodom and Gomorrah. He was allowed to leave because he was found righteous in the Lord's eyes. And he was told to get his wife and his daughters and flee. Just go. Do not look back, right? And that really resonated with me, because in that it says, as soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away. And then you jump down, that was verse 17, then you jump down to verse 26, and it says, but Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And so in this season of wrestling with the hard part of feeling tied to my ex, that I'm not ready to let go, because for me, the love was so deep and so real, and it's something that I continuously pray to be released from. I find myself looking back, and that's when the Lord brought this verse to me. He's like, you've got to stop looking back. daughter. You've got to stop. It's not helping you heal.
Right.
And so I was put to the test on that last Saturday. And I got up and I walked out and I didn't look back, but everything in me wanted to look back.
That's hard,
because
guys.
I've only heard of who this person is he's dating. I've never set eyes on this person. I don't know this person. And, our human nature is like, we want to know.
We do.
Because my mind wants to tell me, like, already the enemies come at me like, why?
Right.
You're not good enough. You're all these things. But I stood up and I left, and it was hard. But when I did it, I felt so much peace about it. And so, but again, go home, struggling, depression's coming down, all of the negative feelings. And I'm like doing everything that I've taught myself how to do, probably half-heartedly if I'm being extremely honest, but still trying to move through the motions, because right now I'm just in motions. And then I was out in the car driving around listening to worship. Then I was like, I'm just going to go home and I'm going to feed myself and I'm going to go to bed. And it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I get home, making some food, and I hear the mailman, because my dog goes crazy when the mailman comes. And so I was like, I'll go check the mail, bring it in, and then finish up my night. Well, in the mail was this sweatshirt with a beautiful letter from my friend. And again, God confirming to me that I am on the right path. And I know he doesn't always answer in these signs. It's not something that you have to have like a physical manifestation of a sign. Right. But the fact that I don't know why I'm receiving them, because I don't deserve them, but I know because God is a good God. That's why I'm getting them, so.
Well, none of us deserve anything.
No, we don't.
I think that's, I'm very big about that. Has to be the foundation. We recognize we don't deserve anything.
Right.
But when you share and various, it is just very clear that God speaks to you. Yeah.
When
He's
we listen.
spoken to you so many different times.
Yeah.
And he talks to everyone. But I think there's a special gift there. And so he spoke to the little girl who then was prompt to pray for God to take it away. Make it stop.
I love that. Thank you for pointing that out.
And he, I'm trying to remember as we're talking about it, but spoken to you when you were in the bathroom. Spoken to you when you came to church. Spoken to you with your friend. And I like this sweater. It's actually a very nice sweater.
Thank you.
I'm really excited. I love that. And I don't know if I said it here or if I was telling Kara, if you're not of faith, you think things are coincidences. But if you're listening, and I think that is a gift, the ability to be able to hear God. Doesn't take away the pain.
No.
You still go through all the hardship.
Right.
But to go back and say, well, His presence is always there, and He never left my side.
Right.
And I felt alone. But someday we'll see clearly how He's always been there. And you share it. You've never said, well, I felt God abandoned me. But just knowing how He's been there through each part of our life.
Right.
But for you specifically, I do think it's a gift, actually, that your ability to hear God. But it's followed very closely by then obedience.
Right.
And so it's not just, well, I hear it, but then your ability to, and your desire and your sincerity in your heart to say, I'm going to follow through on what He's telling me. And that's as difficult as that may be, not looking back, or just whichever difference was in step, talking to your friend Michelle, and good for you. I'm like, wow, she told her, here's what I was thinking about you. You didn't even know, but here's what I was thinking about you. That purity of heart, I think, partly, not that you deserve, but God honors that, and I think that those are two big things. When you're telling me, I'm thinking like, wow, God clearly speaks to you. It's not just hints things and open things, but He clearly speaks to you, which is great. But you're listening, because we have to be. He's speaking all the time.
Yes.
Are we listening? And then you follow that up with action.
Right.
And just, wow, that's very inspiring to me. I'm sorry about your pain. I'm not trying to say, you feel better about your pain, because it inspires me and inspires other people. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. But I think that when we recognize that He will take those ashes He's not gonna put, make them he'll create roses out of them. He'll make gardens, but he'll acknowledge that this is not good. This is not what I had planned for you. Like Christina, my daughter, this is not the life I had for you.
Right.
But if you stay with me, I will make this into something good for you.
Right.
And then this amazing season that is describing there in Songs of Solomon, I would think there's some peace to that. There's some comfort to that, feeling like, okay, well, not everything was for waste.
Right.
And you're still there with me, and you still promise to make things right.
Right.
Wow, you're such an amazing witness to me, and you don't want to be strong. And I see clips or memes talking about, don't call me strong, because nobody wants to be strong. You're just trying to survive.
Right.
But you have been bestowed with a lot of strength to survive, though.
But I'm not about surviving anymore. I'm about thriving.
That's awesome. That's good.
And you said it so well. It's about, yes, we can hear the Lord, but if we're not obedient, and my obedience just fell into line in this journey that I've been on in 17 months, which is why I'm like, I don't like the pain, right, but God's repurposed it. Mm-hmm. And if it speaks to one person, right, that's why I'm not silent. People who follow me on social media, mm-hmm, I write about my pain all the time. Mm-hmm. And it resounds in different ways with different people, and that you don't always know, but I think when you open a community, like when you're transparent and you open an honest dialogue with people, and that can be done through social media. There's a lot of negative to social media, but for me, I've always found like, well, should I be posting this? And I always try to do it with honor, mm-hmm, for the people that I'm speaking about, mm-hmm, but I always reflect it as my pain, right? I never try to, but you just don't know who it's going to. So how many times I'll have somebody who I know socially, right, find me or privately message me. And it's not every time, right? Not everything I'm going to put out there, but there's certain things, right, that will speak to people. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a part of repurposing our pain and thriving, is that, yes, these things happen to me, and I felt alone, and I don't want anybody to be out there. If I can help one person not feel the way I felt, right, then that's what promotes me to want to come and speak with you. That's why I was excited about that. Mm-hmm. I was like, it may not resound with anybody who's out there listening to this, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I am, my goal is to glorify the Lord.
Praise God, right.
To say, not by my strength. Mm-hmm. I could have never, look at where I was, yes, before I met the Lord. I should be in a grave 10 right, times over, mm-hmm, and taking a lot of people with me. Right. But because of what God does, mm-hmm, and I want people to know that there is a God. We live in a world that tells us that He's not real, that we don't need to do certain things, that, mm-hmm, it's okay to, put our politics before our God, mm-hmm, and things like that. And I just want to be faithful to what I've been shown. So
I think you have been, and it's not an arrival. It's not a destination. It's a journey. Mm-hmm. One of the things I was talking to Kara about as I'm learning doing these is it always feels nice about, how do we wrap it up? Make it all nice, and then it's and they lived happily ever after, right? And you move on. But that's not even true to the name of this, because it's the walk, right? And someday we'll be in heaven and it'll all be done, but right, we're not there yet. Yeah. And as you share about your being faithful to God and seeking Him, recognizing that tomorrow may be a down day, tomorrow may be a very difficult day. Mm-hmm. So you go back to, so I turn to Him again. Right. Well, I mean, we want to turn to Him on good days also. I'm not saying just, mm-hmm, on bad days, but that consistency of saying it is not going to end this process, the 17-month pain process that you've been going through, mm-hmm, and experience. Obviously, it's not going to be done after we're done with this interview and everything's done. So I think going back to using those tools that you have been using, which is turning to Him and listening to Him, and Him reassuring you and saying, I have a new season for you. I'm going to require you to do some work to get there. But I hope that's encouraging to someone, that it may not, that process is still there, right?
Yes.
Tomorrow may be a hard day. Tomorrow may be a very challenging day. Tomorrow may be a very depressing day.
Right.
But hopefully we learn from each time. It's like, but He was always there.
Yeah.
He's still there. He's still there. And
He never changes.
No, going back to that. And hopefully that's encouraging for someone that we feel that He's always there. I appreciate really your testimony. Thank you so much for sharing with me.
I think I really felt prompted to encourage that, like, it can be hard to know where to start if you're struggling with things. And I was reminded, my favorite name for the Lord, I think when we walk with Him or when we learn of Him, we develop a favorite. And my favorite name for the Lord has always been Yahweh. And I read something, and I'm terrible about retaining names, and don't ask me to be on a trivia team with you, because I'm terrible. But I read something in the last few months that just resounded so much with my heart and my soul about the name of Yahweh. There actually is no way to pronounce it. Like in the Hebrew language, it's like two breaths.
Right.
But if the way I read it, it was like, it's a breath in, and then it's your breath out. And so when you think about that, every breath we take is praising the Lord. Even atheists praise the Lord because they are living and they're breathing. And so I just want to encourage you that if, sometimes I just sit and I breathe deeply, because it's, I think that's why so many people feel connected to meditation, but it's truly they're calling out to the name of the Lord. That's what their meditation is. And so if you didn't know that, I love that little fact. And so every time I'm like, sorry for that, but just want to demonstrate it.
Oh, that's good.
I'm crying out to the Lord in the most beautiful way. And He's a good God, so I hope you'd find the name that resounds with you. Look Him up. He has so many. And and I just appreciate you taking the time and stepping out in faith. I truly enjoyed listening to the first 3 podcasts you put up, and I so look forward to hearing the others that are coming up behind.
Since you say that, this is my disclaimer where I should say it. My first one said 15 to 20 minute interviews. Oh, foolish me. What kind of story can you give in 15, 20 minutes? I can give a highlight, a little reel, but I can't do much. So they definitely have become longer, but I think they've been very powerful, and not because of anything that has to do. It's just, I think that when you put yourself available to God and let Him lead, He shows His power.
Yes.
So thank you for letting us see His power.
Yes.
And His presence.
Thank you.
God bless you.